Police in Leicester have apparently arrested and bailed a woman over what they say is a threatening post in relation to a planning application that's been given the go-ahead to convert an old pub into a mosque. So I'll show you this and I'll show you what's going on and my general thoughts about the thing, because this, I think, has got a little bit out of control. For obvious reasons on social media, you understand, so I'm just going to explain briefly what's happening here. So what I'm mostly concerned about is the woman being arrested for the post, even though I don't know what it is, but I'll come back to that in a minute. So this is the pub here. In fact, I'm showing you this from a petition because there's a lot of people objected to this conversion, but again, I'll talk to you very generally about that in a minute. But almost 3,000 people have signed this petition to halt the transformation of the Glen pub in Leicester to convert it into a mosque on Hillsborough Road. Now, a little bit of background here. This is obviously a well-loved pub historically in the area, but I've downloaded the application, the planning application, and I've read through, or rather skimmed through, hundreds of different responses to it. Now, there's varying responses. Many of them are in support and many of them are against, as you might imagine. And very quickly, if you would do that old thing of please make sure you are subscribed to the channel and like the video, that really does help my videos reach a wider audience. Speaking of wider audience, you might see some of my videos with a little bit more descriptive thumbnail and titles. I hear you people that like that, but you'll also see they get far, far fewer views. And that's just the way that it works, because if fewer people click on it because they know what it is, then YouTube doesn't promote it. That's just the way YouTube works. So if you do get some vague thumbnails and titles, that's why, because they work better. At least for my content, they work better. But also check out my range of merch, my t-shirts, my hoodies, my caps, my everything. I've done the whole merch thing. I did 5 years without really pushing that, but they are great designs. I really love the designs my new designers come up with. Check them out below. I'll link them below at the timestamp. Thank you to all of you that have bought them so far. I'm really pleased that you're buying them. Now let's get back to the video. Now, a lot of the responses that object to this planning application cite things such as parking difficulties, and the identity of the local area and maintaining the identity and the culture of the local area, etc. Many of those in support obviously say that they will use it regularly and it's going to be an asset to the community. There's arguments to say that this is not going to be an inclusive place for the entire community because obviously it's dedicated to one particular faith. Now, I'm not going to get too sort of particular about these things. I'm just explaining these things generally to you. So there's been a lot of objections to it and there's been a lot of support to it. Now, added to that background, this has apparently been standing empty since 2022. So it's been empty for a number of years. So one of the obvious arguments here is, well, it could have been refurbished, redeveloped, etc., and reopened into the pub that it always was if they wanted it to stay there. On the other hand, you might then say, well, with all of the difficulties, financial difficulties post-COVID, and most recent difficulties with the new budget, etc., the costs increasing and employers' costs increasing and so on, they make it very difficult for a new pub, and any pub, in fact, much less one that's going to be reopened that has been standing empty since 2022. So, how do we look at applications like this in general? Now, when an authority like this receives an application, they must have regard to the National Planning Policy Framework, a bit of a mouthful. But they look at things such as local infrastructure, the traffic, the parking, the local amenities, development of the site and the community cohesion, all of the impact and everything that will impact the local community and how this change of use might affect the local community and so on. As you can see from this list of documents here that I downloaded, there are a long list of public comments which have been redacted, but many of them are in support and many of them are objections. There are, as you imagine, some objections which are purely we don't want this type of building here type objections, which don't have any basis in law and will not be considered a valid objection. Those that might ordinarily be considered a valid objection would be things such as parking and noise and the detrimental or potential detrimental effect on the amenity of the local area. But there is also a noise impact assessment and a highway technical note along with this application, which essentially concludes that on all this information that's been provided and detailed within this note here, it's considered that these proposals meet the requirements under paragraphs 115 and 16 of the National Planning Policy Framework. And on that basis, Leicester City Council should be able to offer support of the proposals when considering the information presented in the report. This obviously talking about accessibility to the site, the use of the residential area, public transport networks, walking, cycling, and otherwise accessing the site by vehicles. There's obviously been a number of heated discussions online, which is where I'm leading to. For example, allegations that this pub was forced to close by sectors of the community, none of which I could find any evidence of. But it's those comments and discussions that have led to people being in trouble and indeed coming full circle in this video to this lady being arrested. Now, I caveat, I don't know what she is accused to have said because I couldn't find it. So I can't comment and probably wouldn't be able to comment regardless whether that post was threatening or not and of a criminal nature. But what I can say is that this does give an indication that police, as this article says here, are actively monitoring social media to identify posts that they believe encourage illegal actions to prevent this development. But to me, that really does raise alarm bells because it raises the question, what do they mean by actively monitoring social media, and what sort of posts do they think are going to be illegal that they want to identify that they think encourages illegal activity? Because if by illegal activity they mean protest, obviously that's wrong. Because if you've watched any of my recent videos lately where the police have got this badly wrong, they have been arresting people for posts that they claim are threatening or crossing some other kind of criminal threshold when they're not, they're just expressing an opinion. This does raise serious cause for concern because if a lot of people air their frustrations about this online, and the police are actively monitoring it, we may end up with a lot more people being arrested just for saying what they think. Now, to put it delicately, there will be, and evidently there are, lots of people that might object to a religious building going up in their area if they are not of that faith. But just because they vent their views and perhaps frustrations online doesn't mean, in most of those cases, that they're going to cross the criminal threshold. This is not, and I stress, it is not me encouraging people to vent their frustrations online, although I do stand for free speech, so I have to be careful in how I say that, because whilst I will fight for the right to the freedom of expression, there are, of course, consequences to the exercise of your freedom of expression. So, for example, you can say a thing, but you have consequences for saying that thing. For example, if you were to say that you think somebody is dishonest, and that was inherently defamatory, you might have the freedom of expression to say it, but you don't have the freedom from the consequences of having said it. And in exactly the same way, there is a criminal threshold for things that you say online, but that should be a very high threshold to cross. And what I don't really want to see more of is the police going around arresting dozens more people for things they've said online and threatening them with going to prison and all of this sort of stuff, because just saying something online should not, in the vast majority of cases, end up somebody being arrested, charged, and going to prison. However, I hope it goes without saying, and I hope it's obvious, but I'll say it anyway. One thing that I would recommend you don't do is start emailing people, as I think some people have, and it may well be the case that people have done this. I strongly urge you not to start emailing people and venting your frustrations directly at one or any number of people, because that is a step further than just making a comment online. That might be construed as going out of your way to directly contact somebody with the intent of causing that person harassment, alarm, or distress. And as I mentioned, the police seem to be in a habit recently of arresting and charging people for such things. So I don't recommend you do that, but I do recommend you seek legal advice if you get the police come knocking around. But with all that in mind, leave me your thoughts and comments in the box below, and I'll see you next time.